Hello AS, welcome to your, this says fourth formal assessment, but I feel like it might have only been your third, I'm not sure. But anyway, welcome to the mark scheme for your main formal assessment. If you're looking at this formal assessment, then well done, you attended the original, the first sitting of it, and this is the best paper to complete to kind of get a feel for how well you're doing, so that's really, really good. What I would like you to do is find a pen a different colour to the one you used in the assessment. Please don't use highlighter unless you want to write in the same coloured pen and then highlight it. So if I looked at your paper straight away, I'd be able to read your writing really clearly, and I'd be able to tell which, so if I wanted to, I could work out which words were before, which ones you did in the original assessments and which ones you did afterwards. So pencil might work as well, anything you want to. Make a note of how to improve your assessment, and this doesn't mean just copying exactly what it says on the mark scheme for the answer. I want you to identify why you didn't get the marks. What skill did you not use? What sentence did you not include? Not the exact wording, but if I said what kind of sentence is that, you could say, oh, it's an example sentence, or you didn't contextualize. More important, you will never get an identical question again. However, you will get questions that require the same skills. And at the end, what I'd like you to do is write 2 things you do differently next time, or that you would continue to do. So if you're really thrilled with how you did, or you recently tried a new revision technique that you feel worked a little bit better, then that you want to keep trying to see if that works, then you can talk about that. That's great. If you didn't do as well as you wanted, or you want to do better next time, I want you to identify something that you would do differently that's exam techniques based. So like I said, there's things like, did you contextualise or not? Did you miss out any questions? What were those skills? Did you not use the P structure? Whatever those skills were, you need to include that. And then also preparation based. So this is the revision part before the assessment. If I said in 2 weeks you're going to do the assessment again, how would you prepare differently? And I'd like both those written somewhere, probably on the back would be best, but maybe on the front, wherever you would like to. Okay, question 1. Let me see if I can get rid of, there we go, got rid of that. Right, question 1, shade only 2 boxes. So there's only 2 boxes that should have been shaded there, which most of you did. The key thing was, if you have a look, there's a square and then a circle in the middle. You only need to shade the circle. Okay, please don't shade the whole box, even though it says that, I know it's weird, but just shade the little circle inside it. Okay, and then we're going to look at each of the statements. So the fight or flight response occurs when the parasympathetic division controls functioning. It does not. The fight or flight response occurs when the sympathetic division controls the functioning. Sympathetic activates it, parasympathetic dampens the fight or flight response. B was correct. Central nervous system does have a brain and a spinal cord. Sensory relay and motor neurons are all controlled by the somatic nervous system. That's not the case. They're also controlled by other parts of the nervous system as well. So you do get sensory relay and motor neurons in the somatic nervous system, but you get them in other parts of the nervous system too. And then sensory neurons, so sensory, carry information from the central nervous system. Well, as you all know, because I think every single person answers this correctly, it's the brain and the spinal cord that make up the central nervous system. However, and you all know that sensory neurons take sensory information, so whether we feel pain, whether we feel hot, we feel cold. If your brain and spinal cord are feeling hot or cold, or can have some external stimulus attached to it, so your brain is being poked by something, or your spinal cord is, that is not good. They do not, sensory information does not come from the central nervous system, it goes to the central nervous system. Our skin feels cold, the sensory neurons take that up to the brain, or to the spinal cord, and then to the brain. So that's what it's talking about there. Okay, so just read it really carefully. They're purposely, you think, oh, it's a multiple choice, it's not too bad, but actually they're horrible, horrible, tricky people. And then the somatic nervous system controls voluntary movements, and that is correct, and we know that, don't we? Because the autonomic nervous system controls automatic involuntary movements, and the somatic nervous system controls voluntary movements. Remember the S for sensory, then there's for the somatic at the beginning, SOM, there's an arrow from the S to the circle in the middle, which is a person's face with a little brain in, or the whole thing is a brain, so sensory information to the brain, and then information from the brain to the muscles about movement as well. Okay. Briefly outline how synaptic excitation and inhibition are involved in synaptic transmission. For some of you, you might need to look carefully. So we did do this in the lesson. So have a think about maybe why that wasn't retained in your brain memory. There's two things it could have been, possibly, maybe if you know more as well. The first one could be maybe not enough preparation in the right places, perhaps. So think carefully about what's in the lessons. Have you got to do some past exam questions? Secondly, you might have worked really hard on this answer, picking up on my very subtle hints that it might come up. But did you test your knowledge maybe? So could it be the way you revised it? So if you just looked at it, that's not going to help you. Testing your knowledge is a good way to. So you could cut out the answers, try and order them in the right order, try and rewrite one of the sentences, anything that you want. But you want to make, and if I can have a mark for each one of these, you want to mention that neurotransmitters can be excitatory or inhibitory. If the neurotransmitter is excitatory, and then can you underline all the same words that I have underlined here? If you are missing any, then you need to add them in. Okay, so the postsynaptic neuron is more likely to fire an impulse or action potential, and you can use either of those words, and whereas inhibitory neurotransmitters are more or less likely to fire an action in the postsynaptic neuron. So it's either it's not to or from the postsynaptic neuron, or I can't think what else. Other words that we put is always inside the synaptic neuron itself. And then summation, so can you check if you use the term summed and net effect? Okay, and as it says there, without some understanding of summation you can't achieve full marks for this one. Okay, the other way it might be marked, you might have included some of these things, but if you missed out some of the underlinings or it wasn't quite clear, you might have been limited to 2, because the mark scheme talks about clear knowledge of some synaptic transmission, which maybe wasn't demonstrated there. The next question, identify which one it was. There's the 3 choices here. So the first question is, what's the environment like? Is it artificial or natural? Well, it was a very natural environment. Teachers do go on training, so therefore it must be a field or a natural. And then can you randomly allocate? And we couldn't randomly allocate. The IV was before and after. They all went on the training, so the training wasn't the IV, it was before and after. Okay, the 2 conditions. All right, and then finally a unique question that might come up for natural experiments specifically. Would this have happened even if the experimenters weren't studying it? So even if the psychologists were there, would the teachers have still gone on the training? Yes, they would. Worryingly enough, the most important thing some of you missed on this one was the word fraction. What fraction of the teachers? And then a couple of other people missed show your workings. So the first one, you've got 16 divided by 4 equals 4 and 20 divided by 4 equals 5, so 4/5. So you need to simplify it down, and then 4/5. Okay, so show your workings and also make sure it's if it says a fraction, then it is a fraction. Okay. What might the researchers conclude? Again, a lot of you drew a conclusion. What you did not do is explain your answer. So a lot of people said that the course appeared to be beneficial on teacher confidence. However, some of you then missed why we knew that. So think, well, how do we know that? Why do you know the course is beneficial? And that's because the majority of them said their confidence had improved. So for some of you, my guess would be if you didn't get the second mark, that might be why. An important thing to say is if at any point you're not sure of any of the answers, you think you might deserve more marks, put a little star next to it, and please let me know straight away, and I'm happy to have that discussion. Either to say yes, you've got that extra mark and we can bump you up a mark, or to say to explain why you're clearly then still not clear, and we can talk about why those marks, which is just as important. Okay, what is the operationalized dependent variable? Operationalized is the important part. Okay, it's not the number of teachers, it's the category. Better, worse, or the same. Now that's shown in the table. If you have a table in your exam question, your IV is really obvious. Make your life as easy as possible by using the table, because the 3 columns or the 2 columns or however many columns there are, that is your IV and DV. Okay, so both are always in the table, so look carefully. So a lot of you just got 1 mark because you didn't fully operationalise it, and some of you didn't get any marks. It's not the number of teachers, it was the rating each individual teacher gave themselves. Which experimental design? Almost all of you talked about experimental design, so independent groups, repeated measures, or matched pairs. Only a very small number looked at methods. If you talked about methods, then you need to think right at the beginning of the session, do you need to really pay attention to that bit, because we've done it lots over and over and over again at the start of the session. So just think, is the there's something you can do differently to really pay attention to that bit of the process, because that's quite important for you. It also says in this case, so have you contextualised? The very first thing I would like you to do after you've given yourself a mark for repeated measures is I'd like you to go through and highlight any of the words that come from the stimulus. So teachers, children, students, classroom, confidence, any of those. If you don't have any, then I might have given you a few marks because I was feeling generous. You might have just got 2 instead of 3, but please make sure you've got that in there. You would get 1 mark for roughly saying the same participants consider their level of training before and after to see if their confidence had changed. And then you get another mark for saying it wouldn't make sense to ask one group before the training and another group afterwards because of individual differences. But it needs to be linked to confidence levels, students, anything like that. Again, if you're not sure of why you didn't get the marks, let me know. Either you might deserve the marks and I've missed it, or we can talk about why not. Give the calculated value of S. So for this one, this told me a lot of you needed. Some of you gave it a go, which was brilliant. I'd always rather see a wrong answer where you've given it a go, because you could definitely get some marks potentially for that, whereas you're definitely not going to get any marks even if you don't write anything in. You get 1 mark for S, and then you get 2 marks for explaining any of the following. 1 mark for converting the differences into pluses and minuses, and 1 mark for then identifying the numerical value with the least frequent sign. So got better was a plus, got worse was a minus, and stayed the same was 0. You ignore the zeros, which could be the third, which is the other way you could get one of the second marks, and then you pick the least frequent sign, which was the minus. Okay. 2 behavioural categories. The most important thing about the behavioural categories is they need to be operationalised, and the second thing, likely to happen in the classroom and need to be a disruptive behaviour. Okay. So throwing something, shouting, banging on the desk. So the focus is on the student's behaviour, not the teacher's. And you need to make it clear. If it was something like talking, then you need to make it clear, because of course there's times when you could talk to your pair. So it's a lot of you said talking when you shouldn't be talking, which is exactly right, but we would want the same. So if you've put something that you haven't got the marks for, have a think about why it might not be operationalised, why it might not be really, really clear. So if 2 people were looking at the behaviour, there's no subjectivity. They would all know exactly what they when they should tally and when they shouldn't. There you go. So they must be asked to do this as part of the lesson, talking when the teacher is talking. So make sure that will be the disruptive behaviour. And it's the number of times, not the number of people. Okay? Because we could have only one student do it, which one, if you only tallied the number of people, you'd do 1. You think, oh, this class isn't disrupted at all. But this one person could have showed 120 behaviours in the 10 minutes at the beginning and the end of the lesson that they were looking at. Identify 1 problem that might have occurred in this observation. Explain how the observation would be improved by addressing this problem. So first of all, can you highlight anywhere that you have contextualised, because you should have contextualised. Finally, the next thing, identify 1 problem. So you would get 1 mark for identifying the problem and 1 mark for explaining why it's a problem, and then 1 mark for saying how you could have controlled for it, so identifying a solution, and a 4th mark, for identifying the solution, and then a 4th mark for explaining how to put that solution in place. It says explain how there, so you should remember step-by-step guide, instructions, how do you put something in place. So for some of you, that might be your target of how you need to improve. And then example here, so observer effect is 1 mark, meaning pupils would behave differently because they were aware they were being observed, 2 marks, and I've used the word pupils. This could be addressed by carrying out a covert observation, 3 marks, using a hidden camera instead of not telling the children they were part of the observation, the 4th mark. So again, children, pupils and children were the way they're contextualised. So it doesn't have to be anything magical, but it needs to be in there. So please can you underline that as well? Okay. Please do check all of your answers and all of my adding up. It could be wrong, but just before you change it, just check with me and let me know. Don't worry if it doesn't change your mark too much, if you don't change your grade boundary, but it'd be useful for me to see. I can explain if it's a mistake, if it's for a reason we can talk about it. If it isn't, obviously, then you need to let me know so I can count a bit more carefully next time. Lovely. Thank you very much.